Two things are happening in this Amazing Spider-Man story. The first is that Spider-Man is going to get a lot more brutal, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in a little while. The second thing is that this comic is actually setting up the Spider-Man comics to tie in, or to basically reflect what's going to be happening with Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you'll see what I'm talking about too. But the way this opens up is this initially shows us basically the appearance of Hellgate. Now, Hellgate is a new character being introduced in the Spider-Man comics. The only appearance that he had before this was literally at the end of the last issue, issue number 6, where he just shows up and tells Spider-Man that his name is Hellgate. Now, at this point, he does give a measure of introduction, right? He says, Nicodemu, second of her line, to be cursed with the far sight, made me breach the soul wall and cross the away lands, so that I may parley with you, Prince of Steel Silk. I am the Hellgate, which is one crazy way to introduce yourself, right? But what he talks about is this idea that their meeting was foretold, and he does not initially approach Spider-Man as a villain. Instead, it's more like a student seeking a mentor, someone who can help him basically become more capable, become a better version of himself, not really through like a moral code, but more just through strength and power. And so that's why when you're picking up with Spider-Man and Felicia Hardy, who were here, just kind of watching this whole criminal scheme unfold when Hellgate had just popped up, that it's kind of like, okay, cool, you chill here for a minute, we're gonna go deal with these criminals. And Hellgate does it instead. This dude literally shows up and just demolishes the building and kills everybody, right? And he's like, your enemies are felled. We will parley now. Which is, I know it's not supposed to be funny, but it's kind of hilarious, right? Like, it's kind of a funny thing. But of course, that leads to Spider-Man getting pissed off. Now, it's important to understand, this is not the part of Peter going dark. I'll let you know when that time comes. But it is kind of wild to see, because as you can imagine, Spider-Man's not very big on killing people, even if they're criminals, outside of some, demigod force like Thanos. When it comes to guys who are just robbing a joint, it's like, there's no need to kill these guys, right? Incapacitate them, hand them over to the cops, and that's it. And so as it turns out, this parlay that Hellgate intended to have isn't really a conversation. It's really more of a battle of sorts, or at least that's the direction that it goes in. Because with Peter Parker screaming about how killing is wrong, going off on the guy about how he shouldn't have done it, he takes it as a sign of weakness, and he immediately attacks Peter. Now, here's the crazy thing about this, right? Peter says, by the time my spider sense registers that I should move, Hellgate's already made contact. A love tap that hits like a 1-ton ham fired from a cannon. Now, here's something important to understand about Spider-Man's spider sense, because some people in the comments are going to say, it doesn't make any sense that Spider-Man will get hit like that. Spider-Man's spider sense is very inconsistent in Marvel Comics, at least in my reading experience anyway, that there are stories where it borderlines on clairvoyance, and there are stories where it's just too little too late because the person's just too fast. For example, there's comics where he's been able to basically stop Quicksilver, although there are debates as to whether or not he just predicted what Quicksilver was going to do versus his spider sense stopping it. Sal over at Comic Pop is the Spider-Man guy, so he's probably the best person to make a video on just how Spider-Man's spider sense works. In fact, you guys should all go ask him to make that video. But the thing here is this, beyond whether or not his spider sense reacted the way that it should have, is the fact that he was overtaken so quickly, because that's pretty much how it goes from here. Spider-Man never really has a fighting chance against this guy. That's how capable he is. He does get a couple hits in here and there, but throughout all of it, right, he offers this kind of monologue where he says, I don't know how someone can throw off so much heat and chill me to the bone at the same time, but it's happening. I hit him with a kick that would get the Rhino to tap out. It makes him mad. And not because it hurts. In fact, I don't think it hurts enough. And that's where Hellgate chimes in, right? Your restraint is an insult, Prince. And so that's what's really pissing him off. It's the fact that Spider-Man isn't willing to fight him to the death. He's not willing to give him his all, which is kind of what Spider-Man does, right? Spider-Man, he fights to neutralize. He doesn't fight to kill. Now, if neutralizing you means beating you to the point where you are unconscious, then that's what it takes. But he's not going to go out of his way to kick you when you're down. He's not going to go out of his way to kill you. It's simply just to stop you from being a threat, which, as most of you guys are aware by now, 9 times out of 10 is just webbing somebody up, attaching him to a light pole, and then walking away. But again, he says, any minute, Manhattan is going to wake up with commuters, joggers, and dog walkers. I have to get this guy isolated as fast as possible. And a little playground taunting should poke him in the ego. If I'm wrong, I'm leaving Felicia exposed. But if I'm right, he'll come after me, which is exactly what he does. Now, here's the other thing about that. It wasn't until Dan Slott's Spider-Man Renew Your Vows that we actually got the in-comic confirmation for why Spider-Man cracks jokes in the first place. Up until that point, it was more inferred. Contextually, we had all kind of figured it out, but there hadn't really been a definitive statement. It's exactly this. It's to throw people off guard, to goad them into making mistakes by believing that Spider-Man doesn't take them or the fight seriously, which would normally piss off criminals more and more. But this guy is no small feat, because Spider-Man asked the question, I don't know what's scarier, that he stopped speaking or that I have, but it's taking every ounce of concentration that I can muster to stay ahead of this guy. And so he's like, I need time to think, I need breathing room. And so he says, I wanted to try this for a while now, ejecting full web cartridges at speed set to pop on impact. And that's exactly what happens, right? These things hit this guy and the totality of Superman's webbing explodes onto this guy, which, as you guys know, would be enough to stop almost anybody. But not this guy. This dude just tears through it. And so Spider-Man is on the run yet again. And time after time after time, it is the same thing. Stopgaps. There's no real way to defeat this guy. And Spider-Man does everything that he can. For example, one of the things that he talks about is that in the city of New York, there's a vast network of telecommunication cables running beneath the streets. Cables that require coolant to function properly. Said coolant being liquid nitrogen, which is stored at negative 190 degrees Celsius at about 250 psi. And so literally, he burst these canisters onto Hellgate, which should freeze this guy dead in his tracks. And it does for a split second until he burns through it, which is kind of what you would expect for a guy with the name Hellgate. But still, he says, there you are. That is the prince that I was promised. Show me more. Because by grabbing canisters of liquid nitrogen and just swinging them onto the guy, there was a very real possibility that he might die. But it was a risk that Spider-Man was willing to take. But it makes no difference nonetheless, because every hit he lands on Hellgate makes him weaker and weaker, right? Spider-Man becomes more and more tired. The longer it stretches on, the more exhausted he becomes. And so that's why Hellgate just grabs this guy by the throat in the middle of talking. And Spider-Man's like, tell me why you're here, right? Tell me what it is that you want. But one of the things that happens as Hellgate takes off with him is Spider-Man talks about a feeling that he has not had for quite some time, which is that he actually feels fear. He's starting to feel afraid. Now, it kind of makes sense, right? Outside of the most dire circumstances, Spider-Man doesn't really feel fear for a couple different reasons. One, because he knows the nature of his villains, and there is a kind of unwritten rule between Spider-Man's villains and Spider-Man himself, almost kind of like the Flash and the Rogues, which is that Spider-Man doesn't kill. And while villains say, like, we're going to kill you, we're going to destroy you, they never really do, right? Outside of, like, Dr. Octopus, right, who switched bodies with Peter Parker, they don't really kill Peter, right? It's almost kind of a game that they all play. And so Peter comes out on top, he webs the guys up, they get handed over to the cops, and somehow they escape, and the game gets played again. But there's also this kind of unwritten rule that Peter doesn't go too far against them. He certainly doesn't kill them, he doesn't kick them when they're down or anything like that again. He's a guy that fights to neutralize, not to kill. And that's the crazy thing here, is because with him having so much control of his surroundings, knowing New York City the way he does, something like this catches him unawares. It catches him off guard, because this guy almost kind of feels like an Avengers level threat to some degree, certainly more than Spider-Man can handle, because this guy starts getting the hell beat out of him even worse than before. Because what Hellgate starts to realize is that with Spider-Man being a superhero and operating and talking the way that he is, his role is to preserve the sanctity of life as much as it is to basically defeat Hellgate. And so he starts realizing all these innocent bystanders can be used against Spider-Man. And so, like, he takes out this huge statue, which starts to just come pummeling to the ground, right? Just smashing into the thing. Peter grabs it to prevent it from hitting anybody, and in that moment, Hellgate just starts smashing his ribs, starts crushing this guy, to the point where, like, Peter's coughing up blood. By all standards of measurement, Peter's been demolished by Hellgate. Now, of course, cops show up on the scene, and cops try to take control of the situation in some form or fashion, but this is way beyond their ability to handle, right? So of course, Hellgate basically takes the cops out. Seemingly he kills them, although it's not really confirmed that he does. And then he turns his attention back to Spider-Man again, right? Broken ribs, broken bones, a dislocated shoulder, one of his lungs seemed to be punctured. This guy's barely standing on 2 feet, but the fight continues on. And the goal is to get out of here and find some place place to at least recover, even if only for a brief moment. And so once that leads to the two of them just smashing into a building and just all kinds of, structures collapsing around them and whatnot, it gives Spider-Man this incredibly small moment to like splint his leg so at least he can try to get his bone back into position. And it allows him to kind of recuperate and to think for a split second, what can he do? How can he possibly overcome this guy? Enter Captain Kintsugi. Now, here's the thing. This dude is amateur at best, right? It's amateur hour. He's just kind of a dude who's there and trying to fight against bad guys as best he can, but he's way in over his head. I mean, Spider-Man can't even handle this guy. And so where Captain Kintsugi is just kind of like, hey, let me help you, Spider-Man's just like, no, get out of here. Like, leave right now. Now, this dude is basically a new kid on the block, right? Kind of a recent addition to Marvel. So there really isn't a whole backstory, at least not that I'm aware of, for how they gain their powers and everything. And this has kind of been happening more recently in Marvel, right? Some characters kind of tossed into the story, they operate a little bit, and that's basically it. Most likely it's Paul, right? It's entirely possible that it's Paul, mostly because of the fact that Spider-Man fans hate Paul. They don't want him to be with Mary Jane Watson anymore. They want him out of the Spider-Man comics, which more recently in the Venom comics has kind of been the case. But the fact is, right, this dude's basically ran out and Spider-Man turns his attention back to Hellgate, which still makes no difference whatsoever because Hellgate just keeps demolishing this guy. And once he finally has Spider-Man down and out, he says, you were to teach me. Everything relies on your strength. And he says, perhaps the far side of Nicodemu is clouded. But Spider-Man has no clue what he's talking about. But Hellgate continues on. You embody weakness. You called me coward. Your death will prove you wretched with nothing to teach me. And that's where Nicodemu just kind of chimes in, at least seemingly telepathically, and is like, stay your hand, right? He is the one that's foretold. Do not kill this guy, because if you kill him, seemingly all will be lost. Now, it's clandestine at best. We have no clue what it means, but Hellgate ultimately agrees. And so 46 minutes after the two of them first met, which is when this whole fight has been taking place, he just tells Spider-Man, get stronger, and clocks this dude, right? Just completely knocks him out. And that's when Spider-Man starts to go darker. And this is what I mean when I talk about the idea of this story basically falling in line with Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because we know he's supposed to get the Venom symbiote, which means he's most likely going to go dark. And here's the reason why I say that. One of the things that goes on here is that the Shocker is basically just, jumping into a criminal act and doing some criminal stuff, right? With his aftershocks, right? Basically his henchman, for lack of a better word. So yeah, Shocker's moving up, man. The guy's got his own henchman now, which is pretty dope. That's pretty awesome, actually. But still, right? Peter just happens to be walking by with a broken leg and a cane. And at that point, Shocker's just like, are you looking at me? You got something to say? And Peter's like, nope. Not me, and just keeps on keeping on. Now, here's one of the things. Some people are going to see this and just be like, this is so tired, right? We saw it in that story when he was facing off against the kids of Sidorak, and every once in a while, Marvel does do this, right? They have some situation where Spider-Man is kind of broken down on his luck, but it's not going the way that you think it is. It's not one of these things where he's like Henry Cavill's Superman, right? Sitting around all day, smoking cigarettes, listening to The Cure, wondering whether or not humanity is worth a damn, right? That's not really what's going on here, right? What's going on here is, number one, he's recovering. And number two, he is on some level kind of questioning what's going on. Feeling fear in that way is no small thing, especially for someone like Spider-Man, who's so consistently in control of their environment. When you're in control of everything, and then suddenly you're made to feel like you're not in control, people panic. They don't really know how to handle that whole situation. And so what he talks about is that working at Rand Corporation, this is his life now, right? This is what he does, because he's basically helping to design technology that can build affordable homes in extremely harsh conditions, right? So essentially making the world a better place, the kind of thing that you would expect for Peter. So again, he's not just kind of given up. He's not just sitting in his house watching trash TV, just eating, junk food and whatnot. There are a couple of attempts by his coworker / buddy of his to kind of get him to hook up with Astrid. But of course, Peter's kind of like, look, I have a girl. That's not really going to happen. But still, right, there does come a point when he meets with Norman Osborn. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with the whole idea of Norman Osborn and what's been going on with him recently, because you may simply just remember him as the Green Goblin, it's kind of cool. The reason why he and Peter are even having this conversation in the first place is because during the era of the Gold Goblin, when Norman Osborn basically became a good guy, he also became the guy who funded Peter Parker, giving him like a new suit and different things like that, or at least money to develop a new suit. And so they kind of worked together, right? That in a lot of ways, Norman Osborn was the guy who could kind of inform Peter of what was going on throughout the entirety of the city. Now, eventually, that turns into a whole story arc with the Sin Eater, where basically it was Zeb Wells kind of getting rid, quote unquote, of the Green Goblin, which is to say the Green Goblin was kind of the manifestation of all of Norman Osborn's sins, right? Quite literally within the comic. And so while we don't have to get super in-depth into it, the long and short of it is that every sin that Osborn had committed, right, the evil side of himself essentially was confined into the mindscape of Peter, which was destroyed by the goodness of Peter. I know I'm making it sound goofier than it is, and I mean, Zeb Wells' run wasn't the most celebrated, but that part was cool. The fact is, Norman Osborn is basically a good guy now, and that's why he's telling Peter, look, I get that you're doing your thing, I get you need your space, you're just like everybody else out there in the world, right? Sometimes you just need to disconnect, and that's fine. But the reality is that when people like you disconnect, the world falls apart because all kinds of things are going on, right? Like criminals are committing acts that they wouldn't normally commit because they don't have to worry about you. They haven't seen hide nor hair from you for quite some time. So the reality here is you need to come back. Not only that, he hasn't been to visit Aunt May, so basically he's kind of ignoring everything else that's going on in his life except for what it is that he's focusing on in the here and now. And that's kind of the initial start. Right? And you'll see what I'm talking about here, but that's kind of the initial start. Selfishness in and of itself is not inherently bad, but when you're selfish and at the same time neglectful of the wants and needs of other people, including the city that you operate in as a superhero, that's when it starts to become a bad thing. And so at that point, you switch over to Harlem and you switch over to Tombstone. Good old Lonnie Lincoln. Honestly, I love it when Marvel does moments with these characters where they give them so much more attention than they normally get, because usually Lonnie is a throwaway guy. And so he's meeting with the Shocker here, right? And the Shocker's like, look, man, myself and my Aftershocks, we cleared double what I promised, so I hope I passed the audition. All the while, there's just like a dude in the back room of Lonnie's office who's just screaming for his life. And the dude's just like, please, right, just get Tombstone in here and I can explain. And so this dude just like goes back in there with a hammer. And so the whole time that Lonnie is talking to Shocker, this dude's just getting hit with a hammer over and over again, screaming for mercy the whole time. It's the most Tombstone thing you could possibly imagine. But at this point, it's really more of a business arrangement, right? That Shocker is starting to work for Tombstone. Because Tombstone tells him, right, you're the first hitter in years who borrowed money for an upgrade and then paid it up on time. And he's like, not only that, you did it with a pitch to make even more money, you know? And so he's like, you're my new favorite, Shocker, after the Mystery Man who beat the living hell out of Webs, of course. And so he's like, people pay more for protection when they require protecting. So do you want to shake your moneymaker for me? And the response of Shocker, absolutely I do. And a part of me was hoping he would actually shake his moneymaker. But then at that point, you switch over to Peter and you switch over to Mary Jane Watson. Now, one of the things to know is that at this point in the Spider-Man comics, Peter does not know that Mary Jane Watson is Venom, right? She's not aware of that. Not only that, between the history and the two of them, one of the things that Peter is struggling with right now is the feeling of loss and the feeling of feeling lost. And so that's why he says, I keep my head down, I draw no attention, try not to think about what was. Present distractions, though few, are critical to keep me from losing my mind. And he says, to keep me from the past. The past is loss, and I can't lose anymore. And so when MJ shows up, he's like, you know, you could have just texted me, like I was talking to my girlfriend, and I'm not interested in doing this, right? I don't want to have a conversation with you. I don't want to have a great big huge diatribe or anything like that. And that's where MJ just says, neither am I. Right? May asked me to come and check in on you, and now I can report that you're alive. But there's something else, right, about me and about us that I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I was afraid. And then there was your fight, and you've always been my friend, Peter, always. And she says, I've tried to be there for you, and obviously you don't want that right now, but I really need my friend. And she manifests Venom, right, to Peter, because of course, as we know, Mary Jane Watson is the new Venom in Marvel Comics. And Peter dismisses it, right? She's like, there's a long story as to how we got here. And she's like, but say something. And he's just kind of like, the way you were teeing this up, I really thought you wanted to get back together. The two of you deserve each other. And he just walks away. And that's it, right? He just leaves her high and dry. And so that's where this is really kind of the final straw for Peter in some way. And here's what I mean. what you do is you switch over, we're just gonna call him Captain K, right? And call it, I'm not running over that whole name, but we just pick up with Captain K, right? Who literally, being an amateur, is in over his head trying to deal with the aftershocks, right? Who are on another criminal spree. And while he doesn't really know much about what he's doing, the reality here is that this dude's gonna get crushed and this dude's gonna get killed, which is exactly what's going on. The aftershocks surround this guy and they're like, you picked the wrong night to cosplay hero, kid. You're gonna feel what it's like to have your intestines liquefied by sound. And like onlookers are just like, he's just a kid. Like, what in the hell are you guys doing? And that's where Spider-Man shows up. And he says, I cannot lose again. So I made a deal with myself. From now on, whatever it takes, whatever keeps the pain at bay and staves off any more loss, I will do it. That pain cannot be avoided, but it can be shared. And it can be shared vigorously, which is kind of one of the hardest lines that I think I've heard. So what he ends up doing is going after the aftershocks, right? But that's when he starts to display this fact that he's kind of falling down this darker path. He's not fully in this darker path yet, but he's starting to fall down that darker path because once he subdues one of them, he kicks him in the chest, right? Just like kicks this guy when he's down. And the other aftershocks are like, dude, what are you doing, man? Like, you're not, the guy was down. Like, why are you kicking him like that? And the response of Peter, it doesn't really matter, right? Peter is kind of hit from behind, but then gets back up. Now, of course, Captain K shows up here and tries to offer some measure of assistance, but Spider-Man literally just webs all these guys up. Not only does he web them up, he actually webs up their mouths and their nose. And so the question that like Captain K has is like, can these guys even breathe in that situation? And Spider-Man just leaves. He just walks away and it doesn't even matter to him. And so at that point, you pick up with J. Jonah Jameson, whose whole podcast is being listened to by Felicia Hardy, because of course it is, right? And so he talks about how Spider-Man has gone rogue. He says he's had a drastic change of heart and tactics, unhinged since his brutal defeat a few weeks ago. Last night, while apprehending agents of the Shocker, 3 people are in the hospital, one with a shattered hip. He nearly killed those guys. And before anyone comments that I've gone soft on criminals, they did get what they deserve. That's true. But he's using a new web formula that takes hours to dissolve, is stronger than steel, and can impale people. Like, I don't know what's happened since the Central Park debacle, but there's only one word for a man like that. And that's when you have Peter Parker walking down the road and Lonnie Lincoln, who actually pulls him aside to try to have a conversation. Now, the thing about this is that Lonnie doesn't seem to know that Peter is Spider-Man. And so it's still, at least on some level, that old school mentality, which is, you know, I need you to get a hold of Spider-Man. In the same way that it used to be, hey, Tony Stark, I need you to talk to your friend Iron Man, right? That kind of thing. And so Peter doesn't want to have anything to do with it, right? In so much that he actually knocks out, or at least punches one of the henchmen of Tombstone, which is not something that you do, right? The guy's personal limo driver. Peter's just kind of like crack, right? Like cracks this dude's nose. And he just says, I'm out of the messenger business permanently. You want to talk to Spider-Man, slide into his DMs or shine a light in the sky. And so it's just blatant disrespect to a guy like Tombstone. And so for someone like him, to an average person that he perceives Peter Parker to be, oh, it's just asking for destruction, right? But one of the things to keep in mind is that Lonnie Lincoln has become a lot more capable than he used to be, very Kingpin-esque in Marvel Comics. Not to say in terms of like his sheer level of power and how grandiose his role is, but in the sense that he doesn't really do things head on too much anymore, that he kind of does things in such a way where it can't necessarily be traced back to him directly. And so that's where he's just kind of like, okay, like you seem to have forgotten what happened the last time that you decided to grow up here. But if that's how you want to play, then that's how we'll play. The whole thing, of course, is being watched by Felicia Hardy, who's kind of starting to realize that Spider-Man is becoming a lot darker than he used to be. Not only that, right, when he's back at Rand Corp and he's basically continuing to work on this whole project, he actually starts to chastise his friend about how his work isn't really up to par, how it's basically wrong and that sort of thing. Now, he's not like screaming at the guy, right? He's not calling him a loser or anything like that, but there is a kind of disconnect there. And so I imagine some of you guys are starting to pick up on what's happening right now, right? Things kind of going in this direction for Peter, right? The Fantastic Four movie, of course, taught us that Marvel just recycles plots from old films. And so if this is going to be what Amazing Spider-Man is going to be, then Peter right now, he's just becoming Bully Maguire. That's literally it, right? I know a lot of you guys are starting to spot that, and a lot of you guys are starting to pick up on that in the sense that I wouldn't say he has a callous disregard for the people around him, but there is almost a kind of arrogance that he's developing here, right? He's miserable, so he's going to make other people miserable. That's basically how this is working. And so as he's walking along, while he is talking to his girl and asking if they want to have dinner later on, there's a massive explosion that goes off, and Shocker shows up to confront him. Right now, this is just him confronting Peter. And he's like, you pissed off the wrong gangster, hence your breathing privileges are revoked. And here's a crazy thing, right? Felicia Hardy shows up here to confront the Shocker, but she doesn't know about the Shocker's upgrades, that it's not just blasting off, electricity in some capacity, that now it's using sound, because when he goes to fire off, right, his new weapon, that she initially thinks it doesn't work because it just kind of emits this whirl of sorts. But that's when she starts to realize what's going on. That Shocker tells her, the rig's working fine. I just added a new setting, but thanks for your concern. Sounds an amazing thing, isn't it? I wonder what's going to rupture first, the blood vessels in your brain or the bag that holds your guts in. And he's like, sorry, this is not personal. I got a new boss, so I got to step up. But for what it's worth, I was a fan, especially back in the day when you just robbed rich morons. And that's when Spider-Man shows up here. And literally, he just demolishes this guy. And Felicia's watching it. She's like, this is not the Spider-Man that I'm familiar with, right? This guy is a lot more brutal than he used to be. And that's where, once he has the Shocker on the ground, the Shocker's like, wait, man, I felt something break. And Peter's like, not yet, you haven't. Because at that point, Felicia's like, you got him, right? You defeated this guy. You can stop. And Peter's just like, for the umpteenth time, when does it end? And Felicia's like, if he comes back, we'll deal with him. Isn't that what you always tell me? And the response of Peter, yes. And he just bends over and breaks Shocker's arm. And he just looks at Felicia and is like, I was wrong, and just leaves. And he says something interesting happens when you sit in the dark and lose sight of your boundaries. It's frightening at first, but when you start down the rabbit hole from the nothingness, a clarity forms. It's not just the boundaries of your body that disappear, it's all the ways you used to define yourself. Son, human, hero, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, the labels and the habits and the rules and the definition of self all fall away. The true you, the one you keep hidden, letting that out, now that's scary. Because once he gets back to another rooftop, this voice comes out of nowhere and says, nice work, but I think it's time that we had a talk. Because Spider-Man is confronted with Peter Parker. And Peter says, you're not Spider-Man. And Spider-Man says, I'm aware, just as I'm aware, you're not Peter Parker. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Joe Kelly's Spider-Man is really good so far. He's phenomenal at writing this kind of stuff. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.